Knock at the Cabin is M. Night Shyamalan's second R-rated movie, and boy, does it deliver! They were working with real weapons and fight scenes, the cabins were built from scratch, creepy dolls were being dragged across the floor, and there's a chilling explanation for all of the erratic close-up shots.
Watch!
But first, I gotta shout out to Dave Bautista. He really wanted one day of relaxation because every other day he was just going through the ringer. I mean, after watching the movie, I can see why he said this was the most challenging role he's ever done. But he also said it's the role he's waited for his entire career. Because he's an ex-wrestler, Dave always gets typecast as, the action hero guy who doesn't really talk. He says he's spoken more in Knock at the Cabin than he has in his entire career. This was his way of proving himself as a serious actor.
It's really to prove myself, is to prove my worth.
Especially with that final scene. If you know, you know. Oh, and as brutal as it may have been to watch, the story behind Dave's demise is pretty hilarious. He didn't really want to shoot the scene that day because the tone is very dark and he was just in a great mood. It also didn't help that the weather was beautiful. How are you supposed to be somber on a sunny day, hey? And the fact that they needed a bit of an overcast to shoot the scene, well, they ended up having to wait anyway. And that waiting went on and on and on. By the time the clouds rolled in, Dave decides he's not doing the scene anymore. Honestly, I can't blame him for wanting to stay alive that day. There's also another reason Dave didn't want to do his intense scene that day. Bro was spiraling hard.
I was like, are you sure you got it? And he'd go, bro.
He hated watching himself on dailies, and even though the work is done now, he still looks back and wishes he'd done some things differently.
Never really satisfied, and I want to grow as an actor. I see room for improvement.
Luckily, while shooting, he didn't have a ton of time to dwell on it because they were on such a tight schedule. He says all of the cabin scenes were like one long, drawn-out shot. But it wasn't just weather and lighting that were quality controlled. Take a look at all those tats Dave Bautista has. Did you notice which ones suddenly disappeared when he was on camera?
And Knight said, Leonard doesn't seem like the type of guy who would have Rockstar on his knuckles.
Every other tattoo you see on Leonard is an aspect of Dave, but they had to switch up the knuckles to really match Leonard's persona. It's clear why Dave Bautista has Rockstar on his knuckles. Gotta show up in style everywhere, right? Even to the 7 a.m. Zumba class. Yep, you heard that right. The party bus was not en route to a typical kegger, but to M. Night Shyamalan's wife's Zumba class. Okay, picture this. The entire Knock at the Cabin cast getting on a party bus at 5 a.m. to catch a Zumba class after filming fight scenes all night. Do you Zumba? I mean, I'd probably go for it in this case, but 7 a.m.? It's a bit questionable. Something else questionable: the way those actors were handling weapons. Luckily, they were playing characters who weren't experts, so they could afford to look a little uncomfortable with them. They were given two versions of each. One that was real, and it was super heavy. The other one was a fake that was used for when they were swinging at each other's heads. Glad there weren't any mix-ups there. They worked with stunt coordinator Manny Severio for a full week just learning how to swing them. And when they weren't swinging weapons, they were mostly just trying to hang out by the lake. Okay, well, not everyone. Just Jonathan Groff and Ben Aldridge. They hit it off so well that they'd often get in trouble on set. Knight was quoted actually saying,
"At some point I was like, there's nothing else you could say to each other. You've said everything. Stop talking to each other."
They had a lot in common, like the fact that they both grew up on farms and their grandfathers were both weirdly ministers. How niche. The vibes on set between them were always good, which was helpful because they spent a lot of time together in close quarters. Speaking of, this movie was filmed in not one, but 2 cabins built from scratch. Anyone know if they're available on Airbnb? JK. Anyways, one of the cabins was built on location. South Jersey, the same area where the bodies were dumped in The Sopranos. Creepy much? New Jersey had passed this film tax credit law to attract more studios to the state, and money talks, so this movie was just one of 45 movies being made in the state since then. The second cabin was built in a warehouse, so the crew could actually control all the technical elements like weather and lighting. Okay, so the way things are done on movie sets is honestly just weird. Kristen Cui, who plays Wen, was pretty surprised by all of it.
They were dragging this white doll and it had nothing on it, and they were dragging it across the floor to make that blood track.
This was her first feature film, so she didn't know what to expect, but definitely not the use of a doll to make tracks on the floor. I mean, that could just be M. Night Shyamalan's quirky directing style, though. Have you seen many of Knight's movies? If you're obsessed like me, you'll know that his camera angles are kind of all over the place. He says he does this to convey emotion without having to explain it narratively. He serves it, and we love it. The close-up shots, for example.
There's a lot of close-ups because they're at a 9 from Almost Go.
The close-ups represent panic. The protagonist is laser-focused, trying to figure out if they're in danger. The wide shots are used to convey scattered thoughts.
I might be talking to you, but I'm thinking about how to get out, and I could do that in a wide shot.
He is pretty particular when it comes to the language of cinema and what that can convey. The only time he really gets to have fun with it is when he's the one on camera. Oh, and yet another thing he does? Appearing in his own movies. Knock at the Cabin is no different, but it was actually incredibly difficult to find a way to actually fit it into the story's narrative. The rest of the cast also had no idea where he would insert himself into the movie. If you don't know, it's a commercial where Knight is selling an air fryer. Every time the cast would look at the TV on set, it was actually just a green screen, so nobody knew what was going to be on it. Knight pitched the idea to the crew, and it ended up being one of the first scenes they shot. And it's hilarious. Definitely worth straying for the book for this one. And also, if you haven't read this book, it's a must-read. When M. Night Shyamalan basically got wrapped up in it one day, he literally thought, I want to make this a movie and direct it. And everyone around him was like, hell yeah, please. We love to see it. So now we have Knock at the Cabin.
As he wrote it, he fell in love with it, and we decided let's go make it.
The book is called The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay, and M. Night Shyamalan created his own story from the book, handpicking all of these actors. He was described as demanding, challenging, and kind of a perfectionist, but in a good way.
You can never really sit back and relax, even if you're in a scene and you're just sat in a chair.
Knock at the Cabin takes a sharp turn away from the original narrative and creates an entirely new story. With a stellar cast and an out-of-the-box director and a touch of comedy, this film is carving a totally new path for contained horror movies. What was your favorite scene? Let us know down in the comments.